everybody, to Illuminate, Navigate, Radiate, a journey of emotional resilience. I'm your host, Brandon, coming at you with another journey segment today. I think this one's going to be really powerful. This gentleman brings a great journey of going through some major challenges and showing that no matter where you're at, what you've gone through, you can always change your circumstance. You can work on yourself. You can have that growth. And it's just such an amazing and powerful journey and story of that. I'm really thankful that this gentleman was willing to share his time and his experiences with us. And I think everybody can gain a lot out of this. So, bringing you on, just want to welcome Josh Holi from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And how you doing today, Josh?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And like I said, I'm really grateful. I just wanted to, express that again for you coming on and sharing that. And I'm excited to get into some of those different thoughts and emotions and perspectives that developed through your story and how you felt in some of those really tough moments that you're going to share with us.
Yes, sir. I'm ready when you are.
All right. So just kind of like just a little more of an introduction of how you grew up, what life was like for you and kind of where, you started to grow into who you are and what you went through.
Yeah, I mean, I was born and raised in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I was there until I was 19. So I grew up in a single parent household. It was my mom and my sister. And, my mom was, she worked a regular job. She wasn't, college educated. No one in my family was. So we were poor by the statistics, but I mean, from my perspective, it didn't seem that bad. We had food, we had what we needed. We lived humbly, of course, on Section 8, but other than that, I was a really studious kid, enjoyed learning, enjoyed reading, did well in school. I was the classic geek. And, that was pretty much my go-to because she was always working. So I was always studying or reading something. And I got into things like alternative sports. Skateboarding and bikes was my go-to thing. And as I started to grow older, I started realizing and becoming aware, I didn't have a father like my other friends had. And I think I started to look for that male figure and look for that guidance outside of the house. So as I was, getting better at skating, I started, trying to hang out more with my friends. And I became that kid that was more so hanging at other people's houses than my own because I didn't want to go home because it was kind of empty there. So, yeah, that was pretty much my childhood. I didn't get in any type of trouble or anything up until I was 16. And that was kind of the start of my life turning from, being a good student, being a good kid and starting to fall into a street style life.
Yeah. And like you said, you kind of started to notice like your friends had their dad around and maybe a little bit more and different things in their house. Did that make you feel, any type of way about your situation or about, you as a person? I know you're at a young age there and just figuring it out anyway, but did you feel any change in like perspective? Or in yourself as you started to notice what others had and maybe you didn't?
For sure. I mean, it didn't start until I want to say until I was about 10 or started hitting 10, 12. I always knew I didn't have a dad. It wasn't really this huge thing for me at the time. I did have two other aunts, my grandmother. So I was just used to being around, the women in my family. And I did have one friend who didn't have his dad, and that's where we started around 10, 12. We started asking those kind of questions like, hey, do you know where your dad is? And I don't have any information on mine. And then the conversation started to gear towards like, we're good kids. Why wouldn't they want to be around? And both of our moms didn't really give us much info about them. So, he and I kind of became very close friends early on. To this day, I'm still, very close with him and talk to him on the daily. But I think that was one thing that started to build our friendship. And, that started to turn to resentment for my father as I started getting older and, doing better in school. I'm like, why does this guy want nothing to do with me?
Yeah, and I think that, building those relationships when you can relate to somebody is so big, especially when we're young. Then somebody kind of, you feel like they can understand you a little bit and see what you're going through, and you do the same for them. When you started to, get more into the street life, and start making some of those decisions that start to pull you into it, or those choices that start to pull you into it more, were you hesitant about it, or was it like, did it just feel good? Was it fun in the moment? And what kind of like pulled you in a little bit more, and then were you second guessing any of those choices as you were making them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I really what sparked all of it was, as we start to get older, we do get into some sort of mischief as boys. I was hanging out with a close circle of my friends. None of them were bad kids, and we were in high school. We were freshmen in high school, and we had a rival high school that wasn't too far from ours. And we were out in a car one night, driving past the school property, and they had this greenhouse that was part of this, like, plant project thing that they had going on at the school. It was a big greenhouse. It had a ton of these little windows, and we thought it would be funny, because we do pranks back and forth on the high school. Sometimes they would do something to our football field, like, spray paint the grass or whatever it may be. So we thought it'd be funny. Oh, let's break a couple of these windows. Like, they're small. It's not a big deal. So we did break them. Like, little did we know we were on camera. They got my friend's license plate. We all got caught. It wasn't a big deal. Our parents were upset, but it wasn't like, they thought we were turning into criminals by any means. But I was given a fine. I had about a $700 fine that I needed to pay, and I had no job. My mom, again, was poor, so I felt really bad and figured I have to come up with a way to pay this. And that was the precursor that got me noticing the people in my school who were selling drugs. They always had fresh clothes, fresh sneakers. They had the quote unquote respect from people. And I thought maybe I could just ask these guys one time if they would help me out. I could get some marijuana from them, sell it, and just be done, like pay the fine and not have to do it anymore. So that was the beginning of falling into that world, because as soon as I started, I made the money really quick. And I was afraid to pay the fine off fast because I didn't want my mother to know I had, obtained the money already. So I was making these small payments, and then felt that feeling again, like, oh, I should do this one more time just to get some clothes, or just to get a new pair of sneakers, or a new skateboard. And then it turned into, what, I could probably do this for some time and just stack some money. And that was sort of the beginning of me separating from my current group of friends and falling into the group of people who were all selling drugs.
Yeah, and I just want to ask you, just with that last part you said there, was there the friends that you were with when you started moving away from them, was there any like, hey man, what are you doing? Or you're going in something that's a little over your head. Was there any outside voice of your friends seeing that? Because I asked that because I know when I started to get into harder drugs and selling them myself, and in that situation, I definitely had like my friends I played soccer with, or those positive influences in my life being like, yo, what are you doing? This isn't good for you. It's not good for the people like us, your family. And I was just like, all right, I'll be fine. I know what I'm getting myself into. I know, I'm going to be able to handle myself. And obviously I wasn't able to. But did you have like that perspective, that external voice from your peers, noticing some of the changes that you were making?
I didn't in the beginning, but I think it was because for the most part, I didn't really tell them much about what I was making, or they knew I was doing it, but everyone in the school was smoking at the time and drinking. So I think they saw it as like marijuana's, it's not a big deal. I was just selling grams, and eighths. It was like small time, low level stuff. And they didn't know how much money I had. And I was pretty secretive with it. So I did start drifting, and I know they noticed that. but I didn't get too much feedback from them like, hey, like, are you okay? Or, why aren't you hanging out as much anymore? And I did later, but by then I had already had that mindset change and was falling into that life and kind of just discredited what they were saying.
Yeah, no, 100% can understand that. Did you get into using anything that you were dealing, or just anything that was around, or were you able to just kind of separate that and like, no, this is how I'm going to make money, or did you get into the using of it as well?
For the first couple years, I didn't do anything. I didn't even try weed until my senior year.
Mm.
So for the most part, in the beginning, first 2, 3 years, I was, completely straight edge. Wasn't drinking, wasn't doing any of that. Just strictly worried about making money. I did end up using things later on. Like I did start smoking for a while, but it just wasn't like a fit for me. I did end up, drinking a lot more often and partying and things like that. But for the most part, I wasn't using.
Yeah, yeah, and that's I was just curious because once you get, mine was kind of the opposite. I guess I got into it first by using and experimenting, and then in order to feed my habits and to fund them, that's when I started selling. And then that never just lasts very long when you're doing it that way. But as you got older and you started to get deeper into that, what was that like? Could you feel yourself like losing those older parts of yourself? Did you have any internal conflict to like, is this really what I want to be about? Is this really what I want to represent? Or did you just kind of keep making those little steps so you didn't have too much of that, internal back and forth about where you were headed?
Yeah, I think I was just being really young minded, especially in the beginning. So even the first year when I was still 16, I got I got into a fight with a guy. We jumped somebody who had robbed one of the other people that was like part of our team of guys that was selling, and that guy ended up seeing me a couple months later, and he ended up shooting at me. So when I was 16, getting shot at, that was a big like game changer for me. I do remember getting home that day and sitting like closing my door and just sitting down, leaning up against it, and thinking, "What the hell? Like I could have been killed just now." And because I was so young minded and so caught up in that life, instead of using that as a reason to exit, I my perspective was, I think I have to get a gun. I need to start carrying a gun if I'm going to continue to do this. And then once I started carrying that, I kind of felt that power, I guess I would say, in a way, like no one's going to mess with me now. I'm not that now I'm going to be able to fire back if anybody tries to take something to that level. And the fighting started to pick up. So I definitely felt like I got lost early. And that same year, before I turned 17, I was already, drifting from my mother. So I took the money that I had at the time and just ran out of the house one night when we were, having a disagreement, and I never went back. I went to an area where there was a lot more drug activity. I had friends who would let me stay with them, and I continued going to school and just living with them and, trying to put up some money what I could to help pay their rent.
Did you have, once you left, did you have much contact with your mom? Was she like worried about you, or at least expressing that? And you were, maybe you were ignoring it, or talking to her a little bit, or was it kind of like letting you figure out, on your own?
Yeah, she was definitely pissed and, saying she was going to call the police that I had ran out of there and I wasn't coming home. I was 16, but I was communicating through my sister and telling her, "Look, tell mom I'm not coming back and I'm never coming back." And yeah, I kind of just cut ties at that point, and she did find out I was continuing going to school, and from there I think she kind of felt helpless, like how am I going to get to him? How am I going to get back? And we just cut off all communication at that point.
Yeah, that's tough. When you're in those, especially when you're young, and you're making those decisions that start to change your life and your parents see it and it just, they try to say something to you. And, I remember when my parents noticed what I started doing, or they started to find my, my needles or my spoons, and they just didn't even know what to do. They were lost with it. And I was like, I was already so far into it. I was like, well, I'm in it. This is who I am. This is what I'm about. Like, either you're going to almost accept that part of me, or there's not going to be much of a relationship there.
I felt that same feeling, dude. That same feeling, because I remember thinking, should I get out of this? And I remember feeling a weird feeling of, after I said, when you're angry and you say you're never coming back, you start to just by nature feel bad for what you said. And then slowly, as the days kept passing and I started realizing, like, wait, I'm actually not going back. Like, this is real. Uh, that's when I started getting that same feeling, like, this is going to be my life now. And, somebody's got to sell drugs. So it's going to be me. And I'm going to do this as long as I can.
Yeah, no, I can relate to that a good bit with those thoughts and feelings. And then just, well, some other people are going to do it. So I might as well be the one doing it. I might as well be the one, putting myself in this and trying it out and making money off it and being able to supply the lifestyle I want to live. Which is, kind of as we keep going with that, were you like attracted to the lifestyle that you were living? So maybe not necessarily just the money, but like the chaos of it, right? I know, like, that was part of my addiction. I felt like, especially after I got clean and I could look back, it wasn't just the drug use, but it was the chaos that I lived in. It was the stress, it was the not knowing what was going to happen next, the craziness and the wildness of, living that type of life. Was that something that was, I don't want to use the word maybe addictive to you, but was that something that drove you and kind of helped you just submerge yourself into it?
Yeah, it played a part. I think something that was even stronger is the fact, what I mentioned earlier about looking for that male figure outside of the house and looking for that. I think what I was looking for was some acceptance from a male that was older than me that I could look up to. So when I got involved in selling the drugs, there was someone who was a lot better than me doing it. And I looked up to that person and I wanted that person to like me. I wanted them to respect me. And then once I started making money, I saw, people had a different respect for me. And when I started fighting, it was the same thing. So I was definitely drawn to that, but also drawn to, how do I get around, like, the guys who are levels above me and get them to think, man, Josh is good at this. Like, he's good at what he does. He's a good person. He's a strong person. Because it was just something that I guess I never felt as a child from a father, in a way. So I think in retrospect, I was more looking for that acceptance, and I wanted people to like me and, in a way, fear me, because I didn't want to be in a position where I was, looked at as vulnerable, because I already felt that way, not having my dad.
Yeah, and I think that just you sharing that shows, like, what we will do for that acceptance at times. I mean, for me, I always felt like I didn't fit in and I was less than, or like I didn't know where I fit into the world. So I was always looking for acceptance in just any peers. And so I would do these things, or I would try these different things out and be almost a chameleon in whatever environment I was in to try to get that acceptance from people. And so, like, when we don't have that, it can be such a driving force in behind whatever decisions or choices. And then once we start to get a little bit of it from somebody, it's like, all right, yeah, I want more of this. And I want to get more of that feeling, more of that acceptance, more of that respect. And then it can kind of push you further into whatever lifestyle that may be. So as it kept progressing for you, I know there was a big impactful moment in there, that kind of started you on that path of change. What was that like? What led up to that? And then kind of what was that like for you in that situation you found yourself in?
Yeah, I mean, I just kept progressively getting in more trouble, there were a couple more instances where, shots were fired. And, I started to become a little more comfortable around that, like you said, that type of chaos. So I end up, it was 2006. I had just turned 21, and I end up getting into a pretty big altercation with my sister's ex-boyfriend. And, we ran into each other. Things kind of got out of control. His cousin came outside, his other friend, we tried to leave the scene and we couldn't. And so it got to the point where I had jumped out of the car, feeling my life was threatened and the life of my sister. And I started firing, and I actually struck him 2 times. I was completely unaware of where he was hit. I fired 3 shots and hit him twice, but it was dark. It was like 7, 8 at night, and it was on Christmas Eve at that. So, once that happened, I knew my whole world was going to change. So I pushed my sister into the car and told her, we got to get out of here right now. She didn't even see it happen. It happened so quick. And so we kind of floored it out of there. People were screaming. They had already called the police because there was some commotion leading into it that I knew, the people in the neighborhood heard and probably had already called just off of the noise. So we sped out of there. The cops were already coming down the street. I got like a mile and some change down the road, and I told her to pull over because I saw a sewage drain, the kind that's like open on the curb, the kind that goes right down. There's not like a lid there. So I started taking the gun apart, and I hopped out and I told her, look, you're never going to see me again. And I gave her a hug. I threw the gun into the sewage drain. And, I knew at that point, like, what am I going to do? I was on the street on Christmas Eve. Thankfully, I knew where someone lived on that street. And as I started to walk down, I saw more units, flying down the street with their lights on, and I had nowhere to go. So at that point, I just told myself, there's no way that these guys are going to know that I'm the one that did this. So instead of running, I just walked to the edge of the sidewalk and took my phone out. It was like a flip phone at the time, like a Motorola Razr, so old. And I put it up to my ear, and I just started like smiling and trying to like act like I was laughing and joking, and it was enough. Like, they sped right past me. And so I started sprinting down the street once they turned the corner, and I just basically knocked on this friend that I knew. I knocked on their door. They were having a Christmas party, and I just walked in there like nothing had happened. And I knew at that point I would have to call somebody to come and pick me up. So I didn't tell them anything that I did, but I did tell, they were a couple. So I told the boyfriend that I was close with, look, I'm in some trouble. I can't tell you anything, but I just need to make a phone call. And so I called my friend. He came to pick me up and took me to his house, and we basically knew we had to wait it out until we understood like what the circumstance was and what happened.
Yeah, that's a lot to happen in such a moment, right? And you said in that moment you knew like things were going to change, or your life was turned upside down. Um, did you really realize like how big of a impact that was going to have on you, and what the reality of really what just happened in that moment? Or was the adrenaline in the situation just too much to really have a second to be like, oh shit, this just happened?
Yeah, I think it was more of autopilot, from impulsively reacting in previous situations. And then in this situation, in my heart, I felt like we could die at this moment. So I just went into autopilot. And it wasn't until I jumped in the car and we were speeding off is when I realized, like, if he's hit, I just did this in front of people. There's people there. Like, I'm booked. And then it turned to, is he alive? If he was hit. And I just didn't have that information. So at that time, I tried to just focus on the moment and just get away. Like I knew I had to get away. And then once I got picked up and got to my friend's place, I had already dumped my phone and my clothes and everything. And I had a second phone that I had never used, and I had a SIM card and stuff like that. So once I, made a couple calls with that, that's when it got back to me that he was hit in the arm and in the leg. So at that point, it gave me some sort of relief. Like, okay, he's gonna be all right, but what is he gonna say to the police? And next morning, Christmas morning, I woke up and yeah, turned on the news. My face was right there, so I knew it was a wrap.
Yeah, I can even imagine turn on the news, especially on Christmas morning, and that's what you're seeing. That's what you're having to process and realize. And I know you haven't mentioned it yet, but going on the run, right? Not turning yourself in. Was there a moment in that where you really sat down to think about that? Like, am I gonna go? Am I gonna turn myself in? Am I gonna just go try to like hide or run or whatever you were thinking about doing? And then what was that like back and forth like? Because that's you know something that just happened. That's a huge decision and a huge weight that you're already having to carry in that moment. What was that like when you started to think about what your next move was?
Yeah, because it was a holiday, I knew I couldn't like call a lawyer or anything like that. So I waited for a couple days, reached out to one, and they had told me, because by then I had saw what I was charged with via the newspaper and the TV, and they said I was, charged with attempted murder, aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, possessing instruments of a crime. And I called the lawyer and I said, look, this is a position I'm in, and what do I do, or what do you recommend I do? And he had said, well, if you take this case to trial, the sentence, if you're found guilty, is 20 to 40 years. And once I heard those numbers, I didn't know about the law much, so I didn't understand, I'd be offered a plea or there was a chance I could get something less. I heard that 20 to 40 and I just hung up the phone and thought, I'm never turning myself in. Like there's no way I can, that's life to me. Especially I had never been in trouble in my life aside from breaking that window. So it was like a huge reality check. And then I just thought, okay, I'm going to run as long as I can and just continue to try and make money. And maybe by some means, I can pay him to not go to court and I can beat this case because I had saw a lot of my friends who were faced with other cases, they were able to beat them. So I thought I could do the same. So that was my initial plan was, stay on the run, make as much money as possible. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew I had to get out of the state at some point. So I shacked up there for a little while because I knew I couldn't leave right away. It was just too hot. And then eventually I, reached out to some contacts out of state and I started, making my way out of there via the bus, like bus trips state to state. And yeah, it was a really rough time, full of paranoia, you know, always having to lie about who I am, what my story is, rehearse who I'm going to be today if I interact with people. And it was rough, man, for sure.
Yeah, no, and I that's what I wanted to ask you about next was like, as you're doing that, as you're on the run and you're trying to, hide or conceal who you are and having to make up all this stuff, what was that weight like? Excuse me, what was that weight like on you and, mentally and did you just at times like think about, oh man, I can't do this anymore? Because going back to what you said with, you're young, right? You're in your early 20s and this happened and you're, right when you said those numbers, I could just imagine being 20, 21 years old and hearing, oh, I'm going away for that long. Like you said, there's just, you're not going to take that option at that point. But what was that weight like? And did it ever drive you to almost turn yourself in or give up that run? And how did you keep going if that weight was that heavy?
Oh, sorry, man. You froze for like the past 10 seconds, but I
Oh,
think I
that's
got
all right. That's
it.
all right.
Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
no, I was just yeah, no, I was just asking, kind of going through that and being that young, hearing those numbers, and then being on the run, hiding yourself. What was that weight like on you mentally? And then was there ever a thought process of like, oh, I give up. I'm just gonna go turn myself in and be done with this.
Yeah, I definitely, it was a roller coaster of emotion because I was basically living out of a duffel bag. I had one duffel bag and it had everything that I owned in it. I had to minimize and move with only a few things. But everywhere where I would go, I'd have to take the things I shouldn't have with me, so I knew I still had enemies out there. So I was, word was getting back to me that there was people that wanted to shoot me for that. And, these were all grown men who were older than me. So I had to take everything they said at face value. And it made me angry for sure. So I wasn't going to, get let them catch me slipping in that sense. But I was also really nervous about what are the police going to do if I do interact with them. They're marking me armed and dangerous on every news story that they put out about me. So I was, wearing a bulletproof vest all the time. I was alone. There was a lot of places that I would stay. I knew some realtors that I was able to stay in, like some empty houses that weren't sold. I had a friend who had a business, like a nail salon that I used to go into and stay at night. I'd never move around during the day. It was just, I even kept a police scanner where I would, when I was in the area, to hear if my name ever came over dispatch, if people had called or had saw me. So there's definitely a lot of times where I'd be sitting by myself and think, what the hell am I doing? How did I get here? I've been in this life now for, 6 years, and look where it's got me. And then there'd be other moments I'd snap out of it and say, like, look, this was what you chose. Like, you made a decision. Now you have to live with it. So I kept trying to just stick to the plan of, this isn't going away. Uh, you gotta go through the stage that you had told yourself and get as much money as you can to try and take care of this. But unfortunately, it just became more and more difficult. I ended up making my way to California and just started getting in trouble over there. It's like, even though I left the East Coast and I was away from the neighborhood and away from those people, I still carried, my mindset with me. And when you have that mind and that's your world, you begin to look for what's comfortable instead of, falling into the right path and just making a change.
Oh yeah, man. I think what you just said is so powerful because I've moved around quite a bit while I was in all that, and a lot of times it was the justification of like, oh, if I just get out of this area, I could change who I am and change what I'm doing. And I remember when the last times I tried it, I moved from Michigan to Georgia, and I think it was within 24 hours I'd found a hookup. And just be, yeah, because that's what you're comfortable with. You can see it when you're in that lifestyle. You know how to like kind of introduce or drop some hints about what you're about and see that reaction, and then you're in. And I tried that so many times, bouncing around a couple different states or a couple different cities, but I took myself with me every time. I blamed these other things on that problem, and I always ended up taking myself with me, my mindset, my perspective, my attitude, my behaviors. And so until I was willing to change those, I just created the same life that I had before everywhere I went. So I think that's a really good perspective when we're trying to change what we are or what we're doing, with what you just said there. Um, what was that moment like when that run finally ended? What was that situation like? And then was there any sense of relief when that run ended?
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of relief, but followed by a new sense of a new weight, actually. But yeah, I got caught strangely enough, it was on accident. My two of my friends, just like I was talking about you to you earlier about my friends that had beat cases. I had a friend who had a robbery case that he ended up beating. The charges got dropped at like the preliminary hearing, and the charges end up getting refiled. And I was, unaware of that. I guess maybe they got some new evidence or whatever it may be, whatever the circumstance was. And I went over to his house. I had returned back to Pennsylvania, to Bethlehem again, because I, was just getting in trouble in California. I made my way to Texas. I stayed there for some time, but time just ran out there. I couldn't stay there any longer. I wasn't able to make any money. I wasn't able to find, you know, like you had said, we know our own. So I had trouble connecting with people and being able to trust somebody or finding someone who I thought could help me. And so I went home and I went to visit this guy, and he had another friend there who I had known. So it was us three just talking in their house. They started arguing over, playing Madden, which was popular at the time, the video game. So we decided to go to the other guy's house, for them to go play. And I was just, going to go along for the ride and just stay at their place. So when we all hopped in the car and pulled up at this guy's house down the street, as we were sitting in the car about to get out, I saw like a police wagon start to drift out down the street, and like immediately just raised my attention. I was sitting in the back seat, and at the same moment, I remember this really clear. I was sitting in the passenger seat on the left side, and I could see out of the rear view mirror of the driver, I saw another unit starting to turn onto the street there. And that's when I knew, like, they got me. They're here, and they're here for me. And all of a sudden, like, units just started speeding up to us, and we all hopped out the car simultaneously. But strangely enough, no one I was able to get right past all of them. So the one officer, as my friend was coming around the front of the car, he pulled his weapon and racked it and kind of scooped my friend up and slammed him. The second officer grabbed my other friend, and I was running up the steps of his front porch, and somehow his mother was oblivious to all this happening. She was just opening the front door to come out of the house, and she had like opened the door and then was turned around, like she was like backing out of the front door. And I just literally just ran right through the front door there, past her, tried to go out the back, but they had all sorts of like locks and stuff on the door. Like I was trying to undo the chain and the switch, and like there was a cop back there by the time I had realized how to open it. So I slammed the door shut. I had drugs on me then. I had a gun on me then, a 45 caliber Smith & Wesson. And so I did the old habit. I started taking the gun apart, and I put the drugs down the toilet. I got up to the bathroom, and I was just standing there, and I'm holding the gun, looking in the in the bathroom mirror, and that's when I know I hear everyone coming in. They're all in the house at this point, and I knew, like, here it is. I just remember having this moment, like looking at the gun, looking at myself in the mirror, and thinking, what do I do? Like, this is over. So I grabbed the pieces, I took them apart, I put some under like some towels, I put the bullets in the trash can, and I just went down the steps, like pretending like I was someone who was in the house asleep. Like I took my jacket off, I tried to, look any different than I could. And I just walked down, like rubbing my eyes. And in the beginning, they all bought it. Like they were just like, oh, sir, just come down here. We're looking for these guys, and they had a third person that they wanted, that was on the warrant. So as I was coming down, everything was fine. And then once I got to the bottom of the steps and like started walking into, like, I just remember internally I was going crazy, like, holy shit, this is working. And one officer, there was about 8 officers in there, and one just so happened to be like the drug truancy officer from my high school and my middle school. And he kind of peeked his head over and was like, holy shit, that's Joshua Holi. And like as soon as he said that, everyone just started pulling their guns out, screaming, like, And that's where I knew, okay, this is over. But I did feel that feeling of relief, but then I just immediately felt a new feeling of, now what? Now do I get the 20? Like, what's going to happen now?
Yeah. First off, that's wild that that even worked a little bit, like that you
Yeah.
were you were able to get out the door and everything. That's pretty wild. But yeah, I mean, I could just imagine going from, being able to maybe relax in the sense of like you don't have to be on the run, paranoid and everything, but then you immediately it's that stress or that I mean, would you say it was fear that kind of crept in of like what was going to come up next?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I was back at square one again, I felt, because now I had established this, quote unquote street credibility. There was people that were afraid of me. There was people that respected me. There was people that were, looking at me like, wow, this dude is, he's wild. And now I'm going into a place where, now it's a whole new place to get accepted. Now it's a whole new place to prove who I am. Now it's a whole new test. And so I felt back at square one again, and my mind was, and I was upset. Obviously, I was angry, and I knew, okay, this is a whole new set of problems now. It's not only the sentence, it's I'm about to be around some people that have done some real terrible things. A lot, like now I'm going to be a commoner amongst, there's a lot of shooters that are there. There's a lot of people that fight. So now it was just a whole nother game of, what's going to happen. And yeah, I would say for sure that stuff's rooted in fear, because I know people get hurt really bad in prison, and a lot of these guys have nothing to lose.
Yeah, did you have to did you go into it like that first day, that first night, that first week? I'm sure it was a little bit of time, but did you go into it trying to really come off a certain way? Or like whether it was puffing out your chest, whether it was trying to get in with a group right away. Did you go into it with like, oh, this is how I'm gonna manage, you know, myself and my time here to protect myself or to start gaining the respect in there that you were searching for on the outside as well.
Yeah, surprisingly, I wasn't thinking about that much in the beginning. Like, I understood that that was ahead, but I kind of was still processing it, and I would say it definitely took me at least a week, like, to really process. Wow, like, I got booked, and like, I've been running for over a year, and now this is happening, and just kind of processing that feeling and trying to understand, what I just felt so uncertain about my future, and it was a really empty feeling. And I think the more people that started interacting with me, the guards and things like that, and everyone saying like, you're getting cooked, like, you're gonna be done, dude, like, you're not going home anytime soon. I was really just trying to process what that meant, and understand, like, wow, this is going to be the landscape for a long time. But because I went to the county first, they put me in maximum security, which was like a separate tier, the people that have like the higher level charges. And when I was in intake, I started finding out who was up there, and I knew a lot of them. So in the beginning, I didn't really feel like I had to do that, because I had friends up there, and I got there and people knew who I was. And from that aspect, it wasn't that difficult. Even a lot of the guards, they were only a few years older than me, and we had went to the same high school, so it wasn't a huge deal. It was still, shitty, of course. But in the beginning, I didn't have that perspective of, this is what I got to prove, because I did have a lot of people I knew.
Yeah, so was it almost a sense of like um I don't want to say comfortable. I don't know if that's the right word, but you know what I mean. Like, it was it almost a sense of, well, I know some people, so I'm a little more comfortable than I might be if I was in, say you had got caught out in California and you were thrown in somewhere over there. Like, knowing people, did that make it a little bit more? comfortable or an easier transition?
Yeah, it did. It did. Just for the sake of, I knew I was going to be there for a while because, these kind of cases don't get handled overnight. So I knew I had somewhere in the realm of a year and some change before I would understand what my real sentence was. At least that's what everyone was telling me. So I thought, okay, I know when I go upstate, I'm not going to know anyone. It's going to be a whole new world, but let me worry about that next year when the time comes. Right now I need to worry about, what am I going to do? What can I set up? Who's going to be my lawyer? Am I going to reconnect with family? That whole nine. So I kind of just took it in stages, but I did start to feel that feeling of, okay, here we go. Once I ended up getting sentenced and knew I'd be headed upstate shortly.
Yeah, so once you got sentenced and you were about to change scenery and move upstate and get booked there, was that a were you able to keep the same mindset from when you were in county, or did more was that another sense of fear and you didn't know what was coming, you didn't know what it was going to be like?
Yeah, I think during I believe I was in the county 14 months before I went up. And during that 14 months, I just dove into almost how I was when I was a kid. I started reading books, like ones that were constructive, stuff that would educate me on, whether it was history or certain biographies, some self-help stuff. I was reading the Bible, and exercising a lot. So by the time I started to go upstate, I was in that, what we would call like like an upstate style mindset of, look, I'm not out here to try and prove things. I'm gonna just stand on my own too. If a problem comes, let it come. But I'm not out here looking for trouble. And I just want to do my time and continue to build myself. So on the way up, I went up with one person that I knew. It was only three of us in the van that drove up that day. And, God rest his soul, the person that I went up with isn't alive today. He actually, unfortunately had a drug overdose and died a few years ago. But, we kind of had each other through that first part of the process. We go through a classification before we actually get sent to like a home jail. So we went to two different classification prisons. They do all this medical testing, mental evaluations, and things like that. We went through, that time together, and it wasn't bad. There's more things that you have access to upstate in terms of like the commissary and the food. So I tried to use that as like a benefit. Like the yard is better, the exercise equipment is going to be there that we don't have in the county. And I was trying to look at it as, this will be a better place for me to do the years that I need to do rather than stay. So in the beginning, I wasn't, my mindset hadn't changed. I was still, getting, like, I still had that mind of a criminal. Um, and it wasn't until later on, once I got in trouble up there and started, you know, a culmination of seeing all the things that I saw up there, which started to spark that transformation for me.
Yeah, and that was the next question I was going to ask you is just excuse me. Um, you know, when you were in there and especially in county or those that early time ups in prison, did you have that mindset? You said as a criminal, did you have that mindset that, oh, I just need to do my time, get out, and then I'm going to go back to what I was doing? Like, was that initially like that thought process, or did you think right away like, oh, I'm going to get out and everything's going to be different?
I had trouble looking that far ahead
Hmm.
because when I was in the county, I didn't know how long I'd be gone for. And I was getting resources to bring things in for me, like tobacco and weed and stuff like that, and alcohol. So I was making money still, selling things in the county. But yeah, once I got upstate, that's when I started to have those thoughts like, okay, if I could make parole, I'd end up getting sentenced to 5 to 10 years. excuse me, they offered me a 10 to 20 as my first plea bargain, and then they offered me a 7 to 14. And my crime carries like a mandatory minimum because I committed a felony with a firearm. And because I was, a first time offender, I was fortunate enough to be able to get that. So once I did get upstate, and in the beginning, I didn't have that shift. So once I got in trouble, I went to the hole up there once. I got in a pretty big fight with someone who, wanted to stab me up and stuff like that. And we went down to the hole. They gave us 3 months down there. We didn't have to do the full sentence because it ended up getting so packed. But by the time I came out of there, that's when I started, like, I felt at rock bottom really. And I understood, this is not the path that I want to continue to be on. And that's when I started projecting, I'm going to go home and be different.
Yeah, and that's those powerful moments that we can look back on and realize when our mindsets and our perspectives started to change, right? And we wanted to start backing that up with actions and behaviors and growth. Once you had that moment, like, oh, this is not what I want anymore. I want something more, something that's worth more, something that can give me more out of life. Was it when you started to have those thoughts, did you kind of battle back and forth? Like, oh, okay, but I'm the street person as well, and I'm in prison right now. So this is who I'm going to be as I come out. Or were you just like, were you able to, again, fully immerse yourself in that mindset? Or was it did you have those early battles back and forth about who you were and what you wanted to represent going forward?
Yeah, I slipped all the time. And it was more so via self-evaluation. So I try to tell myself, this is how I want to be. Like, I came to the realization, like, I would have to change before I left there. Like, in my mind, I thought I'm gonna have to be free before I get out of here, because I can't wait to get out to change. That was kind of my thought process. And so I'd start, reading particular things and learning more and trying to control my emotion. And then maybe I end up having some conversation and I end up getting hyped and get pissed off and kind of come out of my character. And later on in the evening, like when I lay down, I'd kind of self-evaluate and say, like, man, like, I thought I was doing good, and then I got really mad today. And I started trying to give myself grace through that, but I tell myself, like, that's when my perspective started to shift, and I started looking at myself as weak when I would make those mistakes, instead of how I used to view people who had themselves under control and were doing good things as weak people. Like, oh, they just want to do the right thing. They don't want any problems. They're soft. And slowly but surely, as I started, trying to cultivate the right things and seeing I was failing, I started looking at myself as, okay, that's a weakness. Like, instead of saying, this person knows how to press my buttons type statement, I started looking at it like, actually, it's me pressing the button. People can't press your buttons. You're the one doing the pressing. And through those evaluations in the evening, that's when I started carving away and kind of stacking bricks of learning to get myself under control. And I started liking that when I saw that people couldn't move me or, get me out of my character. And I became addicted to that in a way. Like, okay, I want more of this because this is a good quality, and I respect that now.
Yeah, I think that's a really good piece of advice right there, and a really good perspective. Is just that whole idea that it's people can do stuff that maybe annoy us or frustrate us or whatever, but it's in our reaction that results in whatever happens from that. It's if we let that get to us, and if we let that cause that reaction. So I think that's really good. A really good perspective on it, that it's really ourselves pushing that button to then release. And how we do that, whether we stay calm, cool, and collected, or whether we fly off the hinges and and react probably how we want to deep down. So I think that's a really good perspective. And I just want to ask you because, like, and I'm definitely not comparing, rehab and prison, but I'm comparing that kind of controlled environment, right? In those places. So when I was in rehab, and I kind of had that same thing, like, oh, I gotta, because my first couple nights there, I was like, I'm gonna get out and I'm gonna start smoking and drinking again. I won't do the hard stuff, but I'll just, I'll go back to that. And that's when I started to realize, okay, me thinking like this and is going to just cause me to go right back into the same shit. It's going to cause me to have the same behavior. It's going to cause me to, when somebody does, hit me in an emotional way, then I'm going to have to go use again because I got to kill that feeling right away.
Mm-hmm.
So then as I was, I immersed myself in it. I started to do a lot of work, started to process a lot of different things that I hadn't processed in a long time. But when I knew I was about to go home, there's a little bit of fear, like, and a little bit of doubt of, can you do this? Did you change enough in that controlled environment to now you got that free will again? You got that choice again. You're gonna have to make those choices on your own a little bit more than somebody kind of being over your shoulder or being forced into a certain thing in that moment. Was there a bit of fear once like that time was coming for you to get out and go back onto the street and have to then rely on everything you learned to get you through those tough moments, those moments where somebody was going to press you or try to get you to react, or somebody from your old life might come up to you and try to pull you back into it? Was there a bit of fear in that, almost that freedom, when you were on your way out?
Yeah, I had a lot. I was afraid before I left of people trying to ruin me even going home. Because once people find out, oh, he's going home in 30 days, you know, there's people that have nothing to lose that might be like, oh, well, I'm going to test him one more time to make sure he's ready or whatever it may be. People are always going to be people. But I definitely did. I was definitely aware of the stats of the people that were leaving and coming back. The recidivism was like, 3 out of every 4 were back. I saw that people leave and I saw them come back, which didn't put much confidence in me to do it, because some of these guys were more disciplined than I was when they left. And, that those thoughts definitely played in my mind. And I was very worried about parole as well. I was afraid of, from what people are telling me, any type of police contact, they can violate me. I can get pulled over for going 5 miles over the speed limit and go back upstate if they wanted me to. So I was very fearful, but as the days got closer, I, and my mind had already been shifted. I had already went through the majority of my mindset change. I started trying to tell myself, but you're going where you belong. Like, you don't belong here, you belong there. And now it's time to just prove that. So I the same way I told you I was working in phases about my worries, my primary was just don't get violated. Like, don't get a parole violation. Like, go home, do whatever you got to do, even if it's just you're going to be hanging at the house for the most part. Like, we got to make it through parole.
Yeah, I think I really like what you said there with saying you don't belong here, you belong there. You're about to go where you belong. And I think that can be that really powerful self-belief, right? It starts to push away some of that self-doubt or that contradiction in our mind that might tell us, like, no, you actually belong in prison, or you actually belong in this chaos and this stress and these bad choices in this lifestyle. And so I think that's a really awesome thing to be able to tell yourself. You belong in, with freedom. You belong in what you can create as a positive environment, and what you can create to make a change or to continue your self growth, whatever that may look like for you. So, as you got out and you started doing that, I came across you just looking at your page and seeing the message you're putting out, seeing your story. Like I said in the beginning, I think it's a really powerful example of it never being too late. And, no matter how far you went or what happened in your life, I think you're a really great example of, if you're willing to make that change and face the consequences with it, like that change can happen, and put in that work for it. So, just to, kind of, what did you do when you got out in that journey of growth? Right? What were some of the things you did for yourself? What were some of the steps you started taking to continue that growth, and then start to share your story as well?
Yeah, I mean, I started just working at, an odd job that my stepfather had a connection to. I was working third shift. Um, and I was just happy to have a job. I was making like $9 an hour, and I was through the roof with that because I knew parole would be happy. I was working. I was living with my parents again, my mother and my stepfather. And one of my friends was one of my childhood friends, one of the same guys that I broke the windows with when I was a kid. He became a professional fighter while I was away. He began training MMA and stuff like that. So he was boxing. He had a boxing coach at a local gym, and he was telling me about it. They used to come visit me when I was upstate. We reconnected. All of us still had love for each other, and he told me I'd love to take you to this gym. I was in great shape when I got out. 5 years of no alcohol, no drugs, no soda. It was like no candy. I was lean. I was ready to go. And he took me over there, and it's funny me saying this to you because it's like it just goes back to what I was saying in the beginning about that acceptance and about those figures. I walked into this gym and I saw these guys who were professionals, um, in great shape. People were afraid of them, because of their ability to fight. People respected them because of how good they were at what they were doing. But these were nice people, and these were people that wanted to do the right thing, and these were people that they looked at people in the street as weak because they're like, oh, like we beat those dudes up no problem. Like we don't even want no problem with them. Like that's, and I started, like my dynamic had changed. Like, okay, here we are again. And now I'm seeing a group of people that I want to be accepted by, but these people are all doing the right thing. Like I think I'm in the right spot here. And by sticking in that gym for some time, I stayed with them and we became friends, for life. I mean, all of them I'm still friends with. But that was a huge spark of to like a can of gas of change for me because it made me just want to, continue to do the right thing. And I think because of the severity of my crime and just remembering like when I would see people who got out of jail, I wouldn't think, okay, I want to mess with these guys. Like it's almost like you want to stay away from them. And I think a lot of people thought that about me. So I didn't have that classic story of you go back to the same neighborhood and everyone's trying to pull you back into this rough, because they're out there doing the same thing. I'm not able to tell that story, because it was just like people left me alone. And I was thankful for that. And there was, I'd run into those people and they would just say what's up and say they were happy that I was home, and then that was it. Like, so on that side, I felt good, and I ended up getting a job at a logistics company driving a forklift, and started going to college. And in college is where I started encountering people that were a lot younger than me, and hearing some of the things they're going through, and that was the spark for me to start sharing my story.
Yeah, and I would like, just with what you just said, taking that step to start college and being around people younger than you, and seeing what they were going through and seeing what they were dealing with. Uh, what about that pushed you to share your experience? When you're seeing, a younger generation, or you're seeing even just people a few years younger than you, it could probably, I mean, it could even be people older than you at times.
Oh
But
yeah.
like, what about that, when you see that struggle or those challenges other people are facing? What pushed you to start sharing like your journey about it? Because I think that's, one of the most powerful things. Like, even just having this conversation, I can hear so much that I could relate with, even though we're vastly different, have vastly different experiences. There's a lot of that thought process or those feelings or emotions that I could relate to. And so I think when you share your story and you share your experiences, it can do a lot for people when they're actually listening and they want to take something from you. So when you saw that, what about that pushed you to say, like, I need to speak up about this. I need to talk about this a little bit more.
Yeah, I was taking a speech communication class of all things. Like, I
Perfect.
wasn't, yeah, I wasn't by any means a public speaker or, comfortable with speaking in front of people. And I'll never forget this. Our professor was like having us pick some controversial topics. He would encourage us to try to get creative with particular speeches. And this girl gave a presentation in my class, and it was supposed to be a persuasive speech. So we could pick anything that we want to persuade people for. And we were kind of encouraged, like, you could pick something crazy if you want. And so hers was, um, she believed that anyone who was doing life in prison should just be killed. Like, we should put all those people to the death penalty because they're wasting our tax dollars. They're, a waste of space. And her speech kind of turned really serious because her father, it turns out, had been killed by a drunk driver. And she was telling the story, like, I cannot believe that a man can get in a car drunk. He can kill my dad, and he can go to prison for 10 years and just come out, and she was like, so I think when people make these big mistakes, like, we should just get rid of them. And I just remember sitting there, at that time I'm thinking, I gotta be I'm a convicted felon. I just did 5 years in prison. Like, I'm sure I'm the only one in here that's done that. And that's when it started playing on my heart, like, because I started seeing people in the class that were like agreeing. And I was just like, damn, like, I really wish you guys didn't feel like this, because a lot of people who did, life sentences, or who are doing life sentences that I met, really, shared a lot of wisdom with me and helped me change. And so a lot of them are doing that to people that come in to try to help them, when they do have the opportunity to leave, not to come back. So I made a speech for my final speech, as like basically just talking about obstacles that we go through in our life. Whole time I'm talking about myself. They have no idea. And then I reveal that at the end. Tell them, I show them the articles, the news, and on the PowerPoint and stuff like that. And I just remember, like, people in there were so moved by it. They were crying. There was, people just completely shocked. Couldn't believe that I ever done a day in prison. And my professor, was so taken aback by it. And we're close friends to this day. He has been encouraging me from that day. Like, you got to start speaking. You got to, like, this is a story that needs to be shared with the world. So he started bringing me back to speak to other classes. And then when there was college events, he would line me up to get me to speak up there. And once I started seeing the impact that I could have on people, that's when I started feeling like, okay, I have a purpose now. Like, this is something that has to be told. I can't just go through all these things in my life and just stay secluded with them, knowing that I have the chance to possibly spark some change in people. And so that's where I'm at now, man. It's motivated me to keep growing in my career, in business, and just overall goals in life, and try to show people that, even though you're down and out, it doesn't mean that story is over. And you can bounce back from that, even when it doesn't seem like you can. There's a chance.
Yeah, I mean that the ending sentence right there, just because you're down and out, there's a chance of coming back. I think that's powerful, and I think that's a great example. I love that, you know, that's that example of somebody really, I mean, speaking about you in a way, right? Or people you knew, or people that maybe have impacted your life, and saying something, really kind of extreme with it. And then being able to go up there and share your story, and then being able to be given the opportunity to share it more and share it more. And again, that's what really attracted me to what you were talking about and what you were doing, is like, I think that I'm sure it can be a hard thing to be open about at times, especially with, the example you just shared. Some people have that perspective about you. Maybe you can change that perspective for some, maybe others aren't going to change the way they look at you, but, you're out there sharing this example of true resilience of, making some bad choices and making some bad decisions and facing the consequences of them, but then putting in the work to do more, and then not only do more, but share that experience to hopefully, inspire other people. So, that's truly amazing. And now that you're kind of at this point, you've done some speeches, some talks, different things like that. Um, has there ever been any like, have you ever questioned yourself about who you are and what you truly are? And the only reason I ask that is because I know I still have moments where I'm like, am I this good person? Am I this bad person? Like, is this really helping me, move past some of those terrible things I did, or some of those situations I was in? Like, have you ever had that self-doubt now that you're removed from it and you're having that impact on other people?
Yeah. I would say up until 2 years ago, or maybe a year and a half ago, is when I really hit that point of that real legitimate self peace. I think for a while I was just like going through the motions of, okay, I know I should do this. I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And there may have been some times where I thought, is it the right thing to do? Even though I know I'm helping people, like, could I be detrimenting something for my future, or am I making my family look bad? Like, there's so many thoughts that go through my head when it comes to really putting yourself out there, and the balancing act of, is it the right time? Am I delivering the message in the right way? And there was a time when I was in prison where, when I started going through the change, I started redefining. I actually questioned myself of, am I who I actually truly am, or am I just a product of what my parents have taught me? Am I a product of what the streets have taught me? So I kind of started redefining those terms. Like, what does respect mean to me? What does love mean to me? What does, a healthy family relationship mean to me? And that really helped me decide who I am when I left. But I did have to do that again. Because I've made some revisions 10 years ago, we become a number of people as we grow. So I had to do that self-evaluation again. And then, because I was feeling that way again, I got away from being disciplined, once I came home. And I did start drinking again. I did start, exercising less, and I had to start going through those motions again. Like, wait, what am I doing? Am I just falling into what's popular out here and the ways of the world? And I went through that evaluation again, and I would say at this point, I'm definitely, I'm there. Like, I do feel, doesn't mean I'm going to stay here, right? Because life is always going to be life. But I do feel very comfortable now, and very much in my purpose, and dialed into what I'm doing. But those thoughts, no doubt about it, they resurface pretty often.
Yeah, and just, I think that's, again, just a really good sentiment to what healing and growth looks like. I think redefining what some of those words mean to us, especially as we go through life, is super important. What a relationship means, a healthy relationship, that's going to change as we go through life. What love is to us, what respect is, what trust is, what leadership is. All those words are going to change as we grow, right? As we become closer to what we want to achieve, or if we fall back a little bit and we fall a little bit, then we got to reevaluate and see where we slipped up maybe, or see what mistakes we can correct, or maybe it was just circumstantial and something just happened in that moment. But I think that's a really important part to hit on with growth and self-growth, is that it's not just this smooth process, and everything's going to stay the same once you hit a point of self-acceptance. Like you just said, like, you're here right now. Doesn't mean you're going to be there, in a month or a couple of weeks. You might have to redefine something to keep that self-peace. And I think that's a really important aspect. And, I like that you said that. So yeah, and as we get close to wrapping up our time here, I just want to say, I'm going to put your link in the description, because I would highly encourage anybody listening. I've already told some people that I was talking to you and having you on, and that was even before me and you had a conversation. But just hearing your story and seeing what you're about, like, I mean, I truly respect that, and I'm truly grateful that you took the time to do this. But I wanna give you that last opportunity to just throw any other thought, perspective, advice out there for anybody listening. And just another message as we run to the ends here.
Yeah, I mean, well, first again, I really appreciate you having me. I respect what you're doing. I respect your journey. It's amazing to see the things you've overcome. Battling the demons that you've had, because again, like, I know I can't directly relate to it, but I also can relate in the way that we both experience hardship, and we've taken that and we've understood that in the midst of hardship there is opportunity for transformation. So commend you for that, man. No doubt about it. I guess in closing, I think one thing I probably just want to mention to people is to cling to people with experience when it comes to them looking for a particular answer. I mean, I often listen to a lot of people that in my past that really didn't have experience, and they were just people that I respected or people that I looked up to. But you got to look for people that have the experience for the answers you're looking for. So just as a short example, if I was like a soldier and I was going to getting deployed to some war, like, I don't want to get advice from someone who is like an expert on war because they've studied it or they have a degree in it. Like, because that person holds no merit to what they're trying to teach me. I'd rather hear from someone who's been in the field, who's been in battle, who's lost people in battle. Um, and that's what I kind of want to encourage people to do. A lot of the time we look at people and we think because we love them, they have every answer we need, but that's not always the case. So reach out to people that are going through something similar, or don't be afraid to talk to them, because they're going to be quick to tell you their experience. When people overcome something hard, it's really hard to find someone who's going to tell you they don't want to talk about it with you once they find out you're going through the same thing. So I would just say dig for that kind of advice, and definitely keep that self-belief, because even again, when things seem like they're gone and they're done for, there's a lot more left in the tank for you to climb back.
Yeah, and yeah, I think that's a great message, and where we can find a lot of growth is when we lean on those people and actually listen, right? Reach out and then listen to them in those moments as well. Um, so yeah, again, go check out Josh. I'll put his links in the description. Go give him a follow, support the message that he's putting out there. It's really positive, really powerful. And then just one more time, Josh, I want to say I appreciate you, man. Appreciate you being open, vulnerable, and then just giving us your time to share that experience with us as well.
I appreciate you, man, and thank you for doing all that you do.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate those words coming from you as well. So thank you again on that. This has been Illuminate, Navigate, Radiate. Have a great rest of your day.
You as well, man. Thank you.